Okay, welcome back to this online resource about teaching statements for the academic job market. This is part 2. Hopefully you've spent some time going through the information in part 1, including working on that worksheet. And in part 2, we're going to focus on selecting and organizing experiences. Part 3 will focus on strategies for drafting, organizing, and revising the statement. If you haven't already completed part 1, I do recommend you do that first. Okay, let's get into part 2, digging deeper. So in this video, we're going to talk about selecting and organizing the experiences for your statement. Hopefully you have a strong sense of some experiences that you could draw upon to think about the themes and priorities that you want to convey. And we'll talk a little bit about considering the institutional context of your audience. So before we left in part 1, we talked about that in your teaching statement, the best way to connect with your audience is to show an authentic view into how you think about teaching and learning based on a curated retelling of significant teaching experiences that reflects an awareness of your audience's institutional context. In part 1, we really focused on this curated retelling of significant teaching experiences, and the part 1 worksheet helped you think about what those experiences might be. Now in part 2, we want to focus on these elements, an authentic view into how you think and an awareness of institutional context. Okay, so let's focus first on this authentic view of how you think. This is actually a lot more simple than people realize because the experiences that you choose to talk about, so when you go to your inventory and you think about what experiences do I want to convey, the choices that you make there help convey what you think. In addition, how you talk about those experiences, how you tell the story of the experience, and the lesson that you learn from it, that also shows how you think. And what you say you will do as a result of that experience, the implications that it has for your future role as an educator in a different institution, all of those things show how you think about learning, about teaching, and about yourself as an educator. So as long as you're being mindful and thinking about your experiences carefully and thinking about what you select and how you tell the story, that's going to show how you think. Because this is such an essential part of a teaching statement, I want to say you might want to spend more time than feels comfortable in the brainstorming and planning stage of writing this document. You don't necessarily want to jump right in. Since this is one of your key purposes to show an authentic view into how you think, spend some time exploring how you think, what you prioritize, what you think is important and critical for you as an educator in your discipline as you move forward. You can spend a lot of time on that, and it's going to be useful. So I want to pause to take a second to explain how that's useful, spending a lot of time in the brainstorming stage. It might not be directly useful in the sense that you might not be able to copy and paste things from that worksheet or things from other drafts that you write where you're just exploring what you think and exploring what's relevant to you. You might not be able to copy and paste sentences directly into the teaching statement, but the benefit is indirect. Through spending some time free writing in that worksheet or thinking carefully about what you think and what you care about, you discover things. You discover points that you want to emphasize. It makes writing the teaching statement easier, faster, more authentic, less gross feeling because you've spent a lot of time thinking carefully. So that helps your thinking even if it doesn't help the words on the page. The other benefit of spending some time in this brainstorming and thinking stage is that it helps you in the interview process. So the teaching statement is just one part of a portfolio that you send in, and that's just one part of a broader hiring process. So this will help you think about and prepare for interviews and campus visits. Spend a lot of time thinking about what you care about because then all of those experiences can still be on the table in other phases of the hiring process. So do spend time thinking about these elements. What experiences do you want to emphasize? What do you want to say about those experiences that you emphasize? And how is that going to inform you as you go forward? When you think about telling the story of these experiences, I think it's important to consider 3 critical elements. You do need to have all 3 of these pieces in order to tell a story, and this could be called a change narrative. So you want to start with thinking about the experience itself. This is where you're adding some details about what the experience was and how you approached it, the critical details that are necessary for telling the story. From those details, you show how you've reflected on what you've done by explaining the significance of the story or explaining the significance of the experience. So you talk about how those details that you just included to talk about and give the audience a sense of the experience became relevant or are continually relevant in the lesson that you learned. You talk about what you learned from that approach or what you learned from those sets of practices. Whatever details you include, you want to make sure it's connected to the significance and the lesson that you learned from those details. And then you connect all of that to the implication, what you'll do in the future. So from the details you include about your experience to the significance that you learned from that experience, then you connect that to your future self. The more you can do this in a way that is relevant to the institutional context of your audience, the better. So if you have future implications for yourself as an educator that really only work in a particular kind of institutional context, that might not work for an audience member who is not in that context. So for example, if you want to talk about an experience where you engage students in the research process and you include some relevant details about how you worked with students in research, what you learned about integrating students in the research process, and then what you intend to do, an audience member and who's in an institutional context where students are not very involved in the research process or the resources and the things that you would need in order to engage them in the research process aren't available at that institution, then that implication is not quite going to land for them. So the implications for the future is where you have a lot of room to think about context of your audience, and so you can make those details and those lessons fit to that context. But you do need to have all three of these elements, both the experience and the retelling of that experience, the significance and the lesson that you learn from that experience, and the implications for the future, especially the future in that context. All three of these elements are necessary to tell a story about your experience. So it's important when you're thinking about any experience that you include to pause to think about how your experiences have shaped who you are as a teacher and or as a learner, and how they will shape what you will do as a result of these experiences, what you will do in that particular institutional context when you have the role of a professional educator. So here's one way that this could be organized, right? You might think starting broadly with a theme. One of my understandings about learning is this. Perhaps it's the necessity to create an inclusive classroom environment. When I did these particular things, so this is where you would include the details around your experience that showcase that you care about the theme. Maybe it's an inclusive learning environment, so you would include the details that you from that teaching experience that showcase that you actively tried to build an inclusive teaching environment, right? So you would talk about the experience and the particular details about that experience that informs that theme and helps unpack that theme. And then you would consider how those details created a lesson for you, or how that experience helped you consider something new or develop an awareness that maybe you didn't have before, or perfect an approach that you were trying to work in, right? So this is where you would signal the significance of that experience. And here's where you would signal, as a result, I plan to do these particular things, maybe recreate some of those details, change those details the next time I teach this course. So if you're working in an institution, this is where a particular institutional context, this is where you'd want to think about what is available for me in this context. I want to make sure that what I do in my future course is something that an audience member at a particular institution, at this institution, can imagine and imagine being possible and relevant in their context. So we just thought through how you can organize talking about an experience so that you can emphasize those three important features: the experience and the details about the experience, the significance of the lesson that you've learned, and the implications for your future role. So let's think about how that could be organized across the entire statement itself. Again, this is 1.5 to 2 pages. You're going to think about a few different themes and a few different experiences, a set of experiences that you curate to work together to tell come together to create a bigger picture that harmonizes well. So I would say you want to start from your experiences and priorities, especially if you're worried about writing a statement that's unique, that isn't too vague, that isn't too cliche. Start from yourself. You are unique. You are the only person who's had your particular set of experiences, so start there. Start from your experience inventory. Think about what you want to prioritize, what you think is important. Start there. From there, thinking about your experiences, zoom out and consider the themes that your different experiences could theoretically speak to. So this is something that you'll explore in part 2, in the worksheet for part 2, but the idea is that you want to go from your experiences, which are these concrete, discrete things that you work through in your own life, and think about the bigger ideas or topics that those experiences can speak to, that those experiences can become evidence for. So the themes that you discover across your experience, that cut across your experiences, become the anchors of the statement. They become the thing that holds the statement down and is the organizational structure for it. And the experiences and their significance and implications become the evidence. It becomes the way you draw out and expand upon the themes that are the organizational anchors. So what that looks like, let's think about the statement itself, the intro paragraph, the body paragraphs, and the conclusion paragraph. In the intro, you will preview the themes for your reader. You'll basically have to explain to the reader, these are the things that are important to me. As an educator, I care about, or I try to emphasize, or I try to prioritize the particular themes that you explore in the planning and brainstorming part of the writing process. It's important to signal these themes from the beginning in the intro paragraph, because it essentially tells your reader what's important and what they should notice and what they should pay attention to as they continue reading. It makes the statement easier to read for the reader. Then in each paragraph in the body section of the statement, you'll explore the themes that you've signaled in the introduction. You'll use evidence from your life and your experience to show, not just tell your thinking. So that's where that structure of the theme and the experiences and details about that experience related to the significance and the lesson and then the implications, that's where this will come across in each particular body paragraph. Remember that your future implications should be recognizable to someone in that particular institutional context. And then use topic sentences in each of the body paragraphs to connect the themes to each other. So it would be, one way to organize this would be to say, one thing that I emphasize is, insert a theme. Maybe it's inclusive learning environments. And then you would work through. And then the topic sentences of the next paragraph would be, another thing I prioritize is some other theme that you include. But really effective statements will be able to use the topic sentences of each paragraph to show how the themes are connected, how they build upon each other, why both are important, or how maybe one leads to another. So do try to consider in the topic sentences of your paragraph how the themes are connecting or how they're building upon each other. So think about what you imagine the connection between those themes are. Again, go back to that planning and brainstorming stage, spend some time thinking about the themes that you've discovered, and then think about how you think those themes are connected, because then you'll be able to talk about those relationships clearly in the topic sentences of your body paragraph. And then finally, in the conclusion paragraph of the statement, you want to re-emphasize those themes and the implications for your future. And this is your chance in the conclusion to make one sort of final bid for connection to their particular campus and their particular context. You might include specific initiatives or resources that are available. You make a final bid to say, I would especially like to be able to pursue these goals at this university. And in particular, I'm looking forward to utilizing particular resources or in being involved in a particular initiative or something like that. So I think this might be a good place to pause and look at the part 2 worksheet. If you are intrigued by this organizing structure and you want to think a little bit more about themes and how you might organize those themes, great. Feel free to pause here. So you can take a moment to look at the experience inventory and then open up the part 2 worksheet. And you can consider how certain experiences or lessons that you have in your experience inventory could be combined, whether there are things about teaching that you know you care about, so whether you are starting from themes and then you want to work down to your experiences, or whether there's something about this particular remote environment that shaped your thinking and what experiences have led you to that lesson. The thing to pay attention to with each of these questions is that it holds both theme, which is a bigger topic or a bigger idea, and experience, which is the more specific and detailed way that that topic or that idea can be explored. So the emphasis for the Part 2 worksheet is not just to explore the experiences that you have and how you can talk about those experiences, but the bigger ideas and the bigger notions and topics that your experiences could be used to explore and unpack. But if you don't want to pause here, that's fine. We can keep going, and then you can keep thinking about then you can revisit the Part 2 worksheet and think about it then. So I'm going to move on. It is important to reflect an awareness of your institutional context that you're applying to. So we've talked about this a little bit in when we think about the future implications and where you talk about your goals as a teacher. I will say that relative to Part 1, this is where it can get slippery. This is where you can slip into trying to be who you think they want you to be. And so again, it's important to focus on what you want to emphasize and what you want to express. Remember, when in doubt, go back to that purpose of an authentic view into how you think and what you care about related to teaching and education. Don't try to shape yourself and bend yourself into the shape of who you think they want. Think again about, what do I care about? What do I want to prioritize? Start there. That's the sort of foundation. That's the line that you hold in the statement. But you do want to cultivate some empathy, and I like to call this organizational empathy. You want to think about how teaching and learning is occurring in the context of your audience, and do your best to put yourself in their shoes. Do your best to put yourself in that context to see how what you're talking about can be especially relevant or be made really relevant for that kind of person in that kind of context. So you should pause to think about the kinds of things that are shaping the lab, the department, the campus, the teaching or learning that's happening in this context. And I recognize you might be applying to lots of different jobs and you might not have a lot of time to be thinking really carefully about this context. So I'm going to pause here to say, do this as much as you can to the extent that it's relevant. And I would say scale your investment in discovering and thinking about the context to how interested and important this job opportunity is to you. If this is one job among many and you're just throwing an application out there hoping that it sticks, great. I still would spend some time thinking about context. But if this is the job, if this job seems perfect for you and it's so relevant to what you're doing and it's so relevant to the kind of career you want to have, spend more time on this. Spend more time trying to get familiar with the context of your audience so that you can make your statement relevant to them in the different choices that you make about the experiences you choose to tell, the stories that you choose to tell, and the implications that you choose to tell. So if this is a great job and you really want to pay attention and you really want to have a good application for this, spend more time thinking about context, not less. As I mentioned, this is the hardest part. It's hard not to cross the line between I'm trying to reflect the values back to them versus I'm just trying to present myself based on what I think they want to hear. So again, start with your authentic experiences. Pay attention to your feelings in the writing process. If it stops feeling authentic and starts feeling phony or fictional or just kind of gross and weird, go back and try to find ways to be more authentic with it. Your reader will be able to tell the difference. And then get help of readers. You do need other people's perspective in order to navigate this line. So when you're asking for feedback, you can ask somebody to give you feedback on how authentic it sounds. You can give them a preview of the context that you think is happening in this institution that you're applying to, and then ask your reader to consider how well what you're writing lands for that kind of context. It is hard to recognize from the outside what the institutional context will be, so we want to spend a couple of minutes thinking about that. So one way to think about this, and one way to start researching institutions and their context, is to first start with your undergraduate institution, sometimes called your alma mater. So think about your undergraduate institution. Literally take a moment, pause, think about it. Just remember what it was like to be an undergraduate at that place. You can think about what sort of things do you know were valued in that institution? What sort of things that you know from experience were valued in your undergraduate education experience? What are some of the things that you know that university tried to emphasize for you? And then now imagine that you are going to go to some websites, some university websites for your alma mater, your undergrad institution. Where would you look? to find evidence of the things that you know they were prioritizing? Where would you go to look for evidence of the values that you know they have because you were a student there and so you have some insider knowledge? So I would actually pause there to think, to explore that with an institution that you already know really well from an undergraduate perspective. Here are some ideas of places where you might look for institutional values or institutional contexts. You might look for statements from deans or from department chairs. Departmental histories are any sort of places where the university or department is telling a story about how it has evolved as an organization or as an institution. You might look at admissions materials, whether undergraduate admissions materials or grad admissions materials, including materials written for parents. Parents are really important constituents for almost every university. So if you look at stuff that's written for parents, it gives you a sense of how the university is wanting to present itself to its a primary and important constituent. You can look at any postings of course schedules or how often particular courses are offered in your department that you're applying to. You can look for information for graduate students. So if the department you're applying to has a graduate program, you can look at the kinds of courses that graduate students are expected to take, whether graduate students have a TA or teaching requirement, because that means if you're applying to that kind of context, you will be expected to be a mentor to graduate students and to graduate student teachers. You can think about anywhere that you can find a strategic plan or particular initiatives that the university is trying to pursue or that the department is trying to pursue. Look for campus news, because this is signaling the things that the university thinks is newsworthy, things that they think are important enough to signal as news. And then you can look for other kinds of resources and programs that students can interact with. The reason why I think this is important is because you might want to include those resources when you talk about the implications for your future teaching self. If you're looking at a university and it seems that they are putting a lot of emphasis on their study abroad programs because they really value studying abroad, then you can signal that in your future implications that you want to engage in study abroad and you want to take students to different learning environments across the world. And that might be something that you emphasize that's especially relevant in that particular context. That study abroad emphasis might not be in a different context. So this is where you want to be paying close attention to what the emergent values seem to be when you're doing your research. So this is also in the Part 2 worksheet, and I would encourage you to take a minute to try it, right? So think of an institution where you might see yourself applying. Remember, this is just an exercise. You don't have to apply there. And try to learn more about the organizational context of your audience. Try to ask yourself, what are the themes and the big picture ideas that I'm starting to see emerge in this research? Think about what's catching your attention and an experience from yourself that you could authentically connect to that context or to the themes that you're starting to see in this research. So at this point, I think you should take a moment to work on the Part 2 worksheet or continue working on the Part 1 worksheet if you want to spend more time with that. So again, go back to the folder and download the Word file so that you can type directly in it. Part 2 is a 4-part worksheet. There's parts A, B, C, and D. Parts A and B focus on exploring themes, and parts C and D focus on exploring institutional context. And when you're ready, move on to Part 3.